Hello Year 8 and welcome to Lesson 2 in the Identity Poetry unit. In this lesson we're going to have a look at Tissue by Imtiaz Dharker. As I mentioned to you, this is one of the GCSE poems that the Year 11s study in their anthology. They always enjoy it. They always tell me that it's their favourite poem and it's the easiest one to write about, so let's see if you feel the same way. So our big question this week, remember, is what is this poem, Tissue, saying about identity and power? So what is this poem, Tissue, saying to us about identity and power? So in order to answer that question, we need to answer a couple of others, which will help us on our way. So the first thing we need to look at is, what does this poem suggest about identity? What does it tell us about who we are and how we can identify who we are? And then we need to look at what it tells us about power itself. So what is this poem suggesting to us about power? When we've answered those two questions, we should be in a better position to answer the big question of the week. So let's have a look. So last lesson we had a look at the first two lines of the poem, and I asked you to think about, how does paper equal power? Because, as we talked about last lesson, this opening, these couple of lines, present us with a paradox. So it's a statement that can't really make sense, but it kind of does. So the poet tells us, paper that lets the light shine through, this is what could alter things. So paper that is flimsy, that is translucent, that lets light shine through it, could change things. And that was the kind of complex idea, the paradox that we were trying to get to the bottom of last lesson. So if you remember, what we did was, first we mind mapped all the different types of paper in our everyday lives. So you've already got a piece of paper on it, or on the Google form, you've got an example of all of the bits of paper that influence you on a day-to-day basis, or people in your family or your friends. So you should have a large amount of paper listed. What we're going to do is have a look at the poem itself and see what types of paper, what types of tissue are mentioned in the poem. So for each couple of lines there will be a question on the Google form in Classroom. So you can either complete it on the Google form, or if you prefer, you can write it on paper. After all, we're reading a poem about paper. So let's read on. Paper that lets the light shine through, this is what could alter things. Paper thinned by age or touching, the kind you find in well-used books, the back of the Quran, where a hand has written in the names and histories, who was born to whom, the height and weight, who died where and how, on which sepia date. Pages smoothed and stroked and turned transparent with attention. So here are some questions about the opening few stanzas. The questions have been transferred into Google Form in your classroom, so you can type them in there, your answers, or you can write them on paper. Either is absolutely fine. So question number 1 is, what is the Quran? So it's sometimes spelt with a Q, like that, but your question is, what is the Quran? Second question, what colour is sepia? What colour is sepia? And why would the writing be described as such? Why would writing be sepia? What has happened? Third question is, what does transparent mean? So what does the word transparent mean? And then the final question, this is the thinker. So in a moment, if you pause the video and have a go at answering these questions, this one's the one that you'll need to think about the most. And the question is, what is the poet suggesting about the strength of this paper? So in this little extract, in this little section of the poem, we hear about the Quran, we hear about paper that has become thinned by age, by touching, paper that records births, deaths, etc. So what is the poet suggesting about the literal strength of this paper is the first part of the question. And then the second part of the question is, what is the poet suggesting about the metaphorical strength of this paper? And why? So physically, literally, what is suggested about the paper here, and then metaphorically, so as a concept, what is suggested about the strength of the paper. So physically, how does it seem to be presented? Metaphorically, what is suggested about the strength of the paper. Let's read on. If buildings were paper, I might feel their drift, see how easily they fall away on a sigh, a shift in the direction of the wind. Maps too. The sun shines through their borderlines, the marks that rivers make, roads, rail tracks, mountain folds. So here are your questions for those couple of stanzas. Firstly, give 3 reasons why building using paper would not be practical. So why can't we build buildings using paper? Obviously you can to a degree, but why is it not practical? So 3 reasons why it wouldn't be practical. Second question, what is the poet telling us here? In these couple of stanzas, in these verses, what is the poet telling us about the power of paper? So thinking back to that physical power of paper. Third question, what are borderlines on a map? So I've written there, maps are made of paper. See if you can find one in your house. Not everybody has them, I'm not sure I do, but you might have one in your house. Think about what borderlines are and try and explain that in answer to that question. And then your final question, and again this is the big thinker, what is the significance of the line, the sun shines through their borderlines? So the sun shines through the borderlines on a map. What is significant about that? What is important about that line? What is being shown to be powerful here in that line, and what is not powerful? How would sun shining through borderlines be a possible statement on power and where it lies? Here's our last stanza for today. Find slips from grocery shops that say how much was sold, and what was paid by credit card might fly our lives like paper kites. So here are the questions for this stanza. Firstly, what are the fine slips from grocery shops? So what is the poet talking about when she says fine slips from grocery shops? So you'll need to know what a grocery shop is for a start. You'll need to understand what we mean by a slip of paper. What's another word for that? And if something is described as fine, that can mean a number of different things, but the fine slips from grocery shops means one thing. Be careful with the spelling. And then question 2 is thinking about what those fine slips are. Once you've got the answer, what paper that it is that you get from grocery shops, how can that word fine be seen in 2 different ways here? So the fine slips from grocery shops, you can see that word fine in 2 different ways. It might mean one thing, but it might also link into another. So see if you can think about that question. What do we mean by fine as an adjective? What is a fine, maybe, as a noun? The third question, what happens when you fly a kite in the wind and it's very windy? What happens to your body when you fly a kite in the wind? And then the answer leads us to the final question, which is what might the poet be suggesting here about the power of this type of paper? So what is the poet suggesting here about the power of this type of paper? So here we come to our big question of the day. So we have read the opening 5 stanzas of the poem, the opening 5 verses. There are more to follow, which we'll look at in our 3rd and final lesson this week, in which we have quite a shift actually in terms of the focus. But your question for the poem so far in the opening stanzas is, what does the poet have to say about paper and its power over us? So what does the poet have to say about paper and its power over us? So write your answer in the form on Google, in the classroom, or write it on paper. That's absolutely fine. think about some of these keywords that I've put on there to help guide your answer. Think about some of those words. Trying to include those in your answer might help you to explain yourself fully and explain your thoughts fully. Alright, well done, and I'll see you again for lesson number 3 on the final sections of the poem. Well done. Thanks for watching.